lifelong learning speaker for this morning, Justin Bangert. Justin is a marriage and family therapist from the Madison area. He earned his undergraduate degree in psychology at the University of Wisconsin and received his master's degree in marriage and family therapy at the University of Wisconsin Stout. He has over 10 years of experience working with families, couples, individuals, children, and adolescents in multiple settings, including day treatment centers, in-home facilities, and outpatient service agencies. Justin is established in 2 private practice agencies, one being with the Psychology Clinic Incorporated and with the other in the Madison community focusing on Christian-based counseling. He enjoys the opportunity to operate from both perspectives since he's professionally dedicated to helping people in pain bring harmony and satisfaction to their lives. In his presentation this morning, Justin will bring together his professional experience and his Catholic faith, exploring the topic of wholeness, healing, and community in Christ. Thank you, Justin, for being here today. I'm really grateful that you could come out here and join us. I want to extend our gratitude to you, and in case I'm not up from my class before you go, I hope I will be, but in case, thanks so much for being here. And our next speaker is Rebecca Sandy, and her presentation is Balancing Detachment and Charity in Lent. It'll be on February 18th at 11 a.m. Thanks, Justin, for being here today.
Nice. 2 things I've learned is I'm supposed to stay here, but I usually like to move around, but I'm confined. So can you hear me okay? Always status check. I did a couple of presentations and it was a once a month, 10-part series at a church, and it was a big kickoff. Problem was the priest made it mandatory. If you ever been mandatory to a presentation, and I didn't know that it was mandatory. Second problem was they couldn't hear me. The mic wasn't on very well. So the reviews weren't all that great. So I usually like to make sure I double check that. As Grace said, I'm Justin Bangert. So what that means to me is a marriage and family therapist who happens to be Catholic. I really already just enjoy the community that you have, that you've been a part of. My wife and I with our children have been to Hill before a few times, and what a blessing it is. Whenever I think the GPS is wrong and doesn't quite know where it is, all of a sudden I see it, I know I'm heading in the right direction. So today I wanted to start with a question. Usually therapists, by the way, before you get too scared, always ask, what? How does that make you feel? Or how are you feeling? I won't ask that question, but I will start with, how are you? Yeah. That was both 2 of my points. Wisconsin nicety is good. That's usually what we say. Oh, good. How are you? Good. Great. And she was honest. The other one was tired. Right? How are you? You know, we can do that common courtesy, but if you ask that question 3 or 4 times in a row, sincerely, and let it sink in, you'll start to get to more authentic answers. And that it can be even an examination of conscience. I don't know you very well. You don't know what it's like to be, as I'm quoting a song lyric here, you don't know what it's like to be me, and I don't know what it's like to be you. But we think of how are we? We both know pain, we both know struggle, we both know glory and goodness as well. Can we relate? Of course we can, but we have to be willing to check in. How are we? Threw me off one day. One of my sons, I have twin boys that are 12 and my daughter's 14. So we've been real busy, and now we're starting to see how busy they get. But one of my sons, he's kind of he likes to check the weather, both figuratively and literally outside, and always wants to know, but he likes to check the temperature in the room. He likes to ask, hey, Dad, how you doing? Or I wake up Saturday morning bright and early. Hey, Dad, how's your day going so far? Pretty good. Better once I get coffee. Yeah. I don't even know how my day's going. But one time he asked me a question, I think he was 7 or 8. Hey, Dad, how's your life going so far? How's life treating you? That took me by surprise. How is life treating me? How do I answer that? Right? It was a lot of things. Life is good. I think. It's supposed to be. Life is for goodness. It's for goodness with God. But to explain to a 7-year-old, it doesn't always feel good. Right? How do we balance that? What else is life? How would you answer that? How is life going for you? Life is hard. Life can be difficult. We know there will be toils and trials. We know there's meant to be hardships, but we're not meant to grow weary, do not lose heart. But to think of him who endured so much, yet to the point most of us haven't joined him in his affliction, to the point of bloodshed. That's the bigger story, but yet, what does it feel like in this presence? Life is hard, and I say this a lot to my kids and people I work with, is do hard things, but for the right reasons. Or else we're just doing hard things. Life, we know he makes all things good and he'll see it to completion, but this process doesn't always feel very pleasant. So how is life? There's another song I like. Maybe it's okay that I'm not okay. Ever hear that? Maybe it's all right that I'm not all right, but it's he who's holding on to me. It's he who holds the world, is holding on to me. One reason I like to do presentations is it's an excuse for my wife and I to work together. She's an introvert. She's incredibly quiet. And I'm an extrovert, and I don't mind standing up in front of people. But I'm a therapist, so 40 hours of my day, I can't talk about it. And she likes to be behind the scenes. Literally, I think she's on the live stream, but she always makes all these pretty pictures and that. So anything that looks nice, or if you're impressed by anything that's presented, it's really her behind the scenes, which is typical, I think. This slide says it all, in my opinion. What else is life? Life is busy. By a show of hands, how many would agree with busy? Yeah. Let me ask you once for a second. How many roles do you have? How many hats do you wear in a given day? Just as a person, you're already in a family likely. So you're a parent, you're a father, a mother, grandfather, grandmother. Therefore, you are or were a son or a daughter. You possibly siblings. You possibly cousins. You have just family lives. You have 15, 20 different roles. But if you work or did work, you have colleagues. If you're a part of a church community, you have ministries or organizations or obligations. How many hats do you wear? And when you wear those hats, how many different tasks do you play? Or how many different priorities or dilemmas do you face? Or transitions do you have to make? There's a story about a CEO father helping a CEO, soon to be taking over son, and he wanted to bestow the company to him. And the son was doing a meeting management. Father was up above, looking down at the warehouse, looking down at the meeting room, and the son was berating his people, his staff, and he wasn't doing very well at all, and he was not representing the way the CEO father wanted him to. So he brings his son in, and he says, "Son, I want you to sit down. I want to talk to you. First, I'm going to put my CEO hat on. As a father, I love you and I always will. But I want to put my CEO hat on. What you just did and how you just acted is not consistent to the company. So you're fired." This is the heir to the throne. This is the beginning of the new regime for the company. But you're fired. I cannot allow that. He looks shocked. He puts on he said, "Now I'm going to put on my father hat. Son, I just heard you got fired. How are you?" Both of those are real. And if you have any multiple roles, we do so many different things. We have different touch points. How many people do you interact with on a given day? How many inputs or sources of information? How many voices do you listen to in a given day? Not how many voices you hear. That's a different conversation. But how many voices do you listen to? The best, one of the most blessings I can give my wife, a love language, is I go to the timer, the microwave timer, and I put 10 minutes. And the kids know when I push the button, it's quiet time. And anyone who talks, including myself, pushes another minute. And it takes us 15, 20 minutes to get it right. But that's about 20 minutes of pseudo silence for my wife to just be still and listen to her own thoughts instead of everybody else's. But how busy do we get? Life is busy. Life is also distracting. Technology is quite distracting. School schedules, everything else we do is distracting. But for technology, let's just take that for a second. I'm a addiction specialist, and one of those was also training in technology and just the impact on the brain. How many inputs do you have with technology? Can be so accessible, so abundant, so available. Instead of eye contact, we've kind of traded that for iPads. Instead of face-to-face time, we have FaceTime or Facebook. So we lose that humanness at times. But it's amazing if you take inventory. How many devices would you say you have in your house? Just think about for a second. Run through your house. How many devices do you have? I have 3 TVs, 2 that work downstairs. I think it works. I have 2 iPads. I have 3 Chromebooks for our kids for school, especially with homeschool COVID. I have 2 work laptops, my wife and I. And we have 3 iPhones, one for each of us, and our children share a dumb iPhone. It's not a smartphone, it's a dumb phone. I just lost count how many that is. But if we'd spent any amount of time on any of those, how distracting is it? Life can be so distracting. Life is easy. That's what it's been told. You ever hear that? Life is easy? My favorite line in therapy is life is easy until people get involved. Right? There's always conflicting realities or agendas. There's different personalities, perhaps. There's hurts and habits and hangups that we all carry with us. And when you put those together, it can get really interesting. So life is easy until people get involved, yet we have a larger truth. Life can be scary. My children each had some type of development as they grew old, as they were born. We had a few hospital things that we had to address, and it took one of our children. It felt like we'd never get out of the hospital for a good month or so. It felt like at least a month, and I always wondered, like, all the things that can go wrong in a person's body, and yet how many people are fairly healthy? All the things that could, as a parent, it just shocked me of all the things I had to worry about, and yet I can't act in fear. We have to be of courage. We have to be not afraid and know that he's with us, but also not afraid and know that he's God. And life can be challenging. We're called to lean into those challenges, to trust the personal curriculum. I consider challenges as a curriculum opportunity, a growth opportunity. But it means we have to be more Christ-like. It gets at our character, or else we just feel fatigued and tired and weary. The burdens we carry and the barriers we have to overcome are actually what become a blessing if we see the other side of it. Good news is God already has a plan for this. That's the good news. Good news is design in our brain. I want to show you brain chemicals. As a psychologist, I study the brain and get to teach all sorts of cool things. So I try not to use too many slides with words. I have a couple of them. This is one. So these are kind of alphabet soup here. We call this EDSO, E-D-S-O, endorphin, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. But it starts with cortisol. You all know cortisol. It's stress, okay? Busy, stress, fatigue. So stress, think of it like coming rain down or snowing down on the top of a mountain. Stress can either make us bitter or make us better. It can go on one side of the mountain, which is what it starts with, the endorphin or dopamine. Endorphins could also be adrenaline, norepinephrine, but endorphins are your response style. Your fix it or run away from it or give it to someone else. Your endorphins are your reaction and your adrenaline. And if you just keep sprinting through life, you're exhausted. And literally, physically, you have adrenaline fatigue. So we can't just kick in our endorphins. At some point, our afterburners, our gas tank literally needs to get filled too. Dopamine is the seeking pleasure, avoiding pain instinct. We all have that chemical, and that's okay. We might have comfort food. We might, and I'll talk about relationship-based and Christ-based comfort, which is what we're called to. But dopamine can also be a addiction. It can be one of the most addictive dopamine loops that we can get in. You all probably do it to some extent. Procrastination. Because when you procrastinate, what's happening? You have something stressful to face, and you probably have ongoing stresses or dilemmas or burdens, or you're not quite as up to energy level. So what do? You find an excuse to hit the easy button. I'll do it later. Oh, good, we'll postpone. Something to kind of relief for a minute, and that feels good. But that thing didn't go away, or your stress probably all of a sudden isn't gone. So the next time you face that deadline or dilemma, your brain last remembers the what? The easy button. So you find another reason, excuse, and you hit the easy button. So you keep developing a way to sort of avoid the bigger issue. Does that make sense? I do it. You likely do it. So dopamine can kind of be tricky in that way. We're meant to, though, the left side is really self-based chemicals that kind of help us survive or help us respond. The right side of is actually selfless or relationship-based chemicals, and that's where we thrive. So relationship-based serotonin, there's different uses of serotonin. But serotonin is, in this case, a response to goodness. It's a responding chemical. When you show kindness, someone else hopefully is kind back to you. When we respond out of compassion or care, we draw some strength out of us to connect, to be of love or goodness. So the response to goodness, Scripture and our relationship with God is meant to to have us respond and act in goodness. And it's not fatiguing, it's actually energizing versus energy draining. And when we use oxytocin, that's the bonding chemical. That's like that's the investment of being a source of goodness. So oxytocin is natural when a mother holds a child or nurses a child, when a father connects to a child, bonding between marriage couples, bonding when you have a hard, difficult situation at work and you see it through, or with church, we come to an agreement, we come to conclusion, and we kind of stick through it. That's oxytocin and serotonin. We're drawing out goodness, and we have the ability to do that at any given moment. So as we talk about Scripture, think of those things that are pure and loving and righteous and noble. Think of those things. Or think of him who endured so much, but do not grow weary, do not lose heart. It's responding to goodness. And that's what we really want to do, is identify what's going stressful or hard, get on the other side of goodness, because we can either just survive or we can thrive. We can kind of burn ourselves out, or we can keep returning to the cross, returning to communion, returning, and literally you can reclaim your neural circuitry. For every thumb, you have 4 fingers. I teach this to kids all the time. For every thumb, you have 4 fingers. For every yeah, but, or oh, shucks, or I wish, or oh, what else is true? What else is good? And in marriage or relationships, 5 positives to 1 negative. That's a good ratio. Problem is the negatives feel like about 10. So it's actually 50 positives to 1 negative. But I like to have clients start with 5 to 1. Okay. What else is life? Life is change. I've never met the same person twice. I see clients for 15 years. She read from a bio. I've actually been doing this 15 years, and I left my Christian counseling agency, and I'm doing behind the scenes Christian counseling, but I'm very well known in the area for that. But I've never, and sometimes I get to speak very directly about Scripture, and other times I don't, but I still do Christ's work behind the scenes without them knowing. About 8 months later, they're like, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" Absolutely. But I never met the same person twice. Every time a client comes in, they're a different version of themselves. I might see them next week, and yet they've experienced something, good, bad, ugly, with God or without. We're always different, so we're always changing, and so is the life around us. And with change comes, unfortunately, loss. A loss of stability or familiarity, or a loss of what we thought, with a loss of what we were thinking, transitions, even good transitions. Seeing the ages, I'm assuming you would relate, if you have children or grandchildren, to love your kids is to grieve them. They'll never be as little. My daughter probably eye rolls every time I say it, but if I had one wish, if I could freeze my kids, I just pause them for like 5 years, come back and do it. We just can't stop them from growing. And yet we love them, but we grieve because we know what the continuation, but it's a glorious grief, but it's a sad as well. Because loss has grief in it. And grief done well means we work through the shock and denial or the bargaining. We work through the hurt or the protest. We bring it back to goodness. And only when we accept, when we surrender. Now we're starting to sound from a holiness side. When we adapt and integrate. Good Friday always happens before Easter Sunday. There's always a sadness or a loss or a death. But then there's a goodness. But we have to see through it. And so we have to see life. Life is grief, but grief is growth. And think of the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who. None of those are really good conditions, so to speak. None of those do we strive for on a human level, but at a relational and spiritual level, we know there's goodness on the other side of the heart. To rejoice and be glad, even when we don't feel like it. It's Paul and Silas singing in prison. To do well with what's been given, to be a salt and light. Those are words we use, but again, our brain can hear them, but unless we emotionally work to the other side in our own path, we're going to just survive. I believe, and I see this firsthand, life leaves feeling walking wounded. Where my side is when I hear clients are silently suffering. They finally bring to words what they've been holding for a long time. And we try our best, but we tend to just feel like we're limping leaders. We're sort of leading our children, our family as we can, but we're hurting. And as we bring our weakness to his strength, literally the things and people that wound us the most, this is the awesome part, literally are part of what heals us the most. They might not be able to directly. It might be through forgiving them. It might not be even safe for us. We can't go back and change something, but we can go back and learn with God or bring Christ to that place in our heart and heal it. The things that hurt or struggle with the most are the things that can heal and grow you the most with God. I believe that. I think wholeness through holiness, through his holiness, and that's what we want to work towards, to regain our wholeness through his holiness. But it's an active relationship. It's an active overcoming those barriers and all the reasons why not. So today, where do we begin? It all starts with a story. Ever notice that? The Bible's just a giant story. God is both the author and the perfecter. It starts essentially with the marriage. It ends with the marriage, essentially. If you drew out a time, and so does yours, your life is a story. If you drew out a timeline of your life, starting with birth, I'm going to do left to right on opposite as therapists. Presenters have to do the opposite here. So if we go left, I'm not dyslexic, but if we go left to right, and you drew a timeline, and you put all the positive things that happen in your given life, and maybe for how long they lasted, could be forever, and also the negative things below, things that were hurtful, somebody left or something happened or this, and you just put a scatter plot. What would your life look like? What would that shape of it be? Mostly positives, continue to progress? Would you be carrying weight or burdens with you? We all have those. Just to put that on paper once. As humans, we're born into different circumstances. Those different stories, some are better, some are worse, but Christ says, blessed are those who. So yet as we track through life, our timelines would look drastically different. But it's those stories that are told by our lives that we try to bestow upon the goodness. I was a middle child, and I learned quickly. My brother is 5 years older. My mom was very open and expressive to me, and I appreciate she integrated really well with her faith walk, which wasn't always sun and roses. In fact, it wasn't, and that's why it was such a powerful walk. But she shared with me those things. So I learned pretty quickly to learn. I like to try on things. I like to do a little bit of everything if I could. If I had 7 different lives, 7 different careers, I would do all sorts of different careers. So I've learned quickly it's better to not actually touch all the hot ovens and get burned, but to rather learn what other people do that didn't go so well and decide if I want to try that myself or not. So to hear our story or to share our story and to allow that to be for our children or those around us, to see God in it. And that's what the Bible is also meant to be. It's a part of his story, both the author and the perfecter. What is story? So classic Disney movies, classic Pixar movies, you can ruin this for your kids if you want. As they get older, they're all the same. Once Upon a Time, or Situation Normal. I don't know if you can read the text here, so I apologize the way it caught up, but Situation Normal. There's a likable character in an interesting situation. That's really what all Pixar, all movies start with. Until one day, something happens, some kind of drama, crisis, challenge. We call that a call to adventure. If you like Star Wars or anything, Luke Skywalker is invited and he goes, no, I don't want to do that. And then something else happens. In other words, if this is God, God invites us, prompts us, and we sometimes, no, not quite ready. I don't want to go there. A vocation perhaps, or a charism to pursue. There's a call to adventure. And whatever we choose, either engage it or don't. But until one day, and it might keep repeating until we engage with God and take on that call to adventure and that call to action to do something about it. Because story is until one day. And when we finally do decide, or when something happens to us because of that, and because of that, and because of that, until finally some kind of challenge, some kind of conclusion either got better or got worse. It grew or it didn't. And then we return to a new normal until one day. Problem with life is we have many sequels. And we don't always like those. We finish one curriculum, we say, good Lord, I did my part and I'm done. I want to rest now. And he adds another one. And he adds another one. Sometimes it's our transition, our stage, it could be our life or our health or our finances. But there's always an invitation to a story. And if you look at your stories, what you'll find is life is easy when things go well. Congruent, we call that. If I had to boil down words, congruency. The Bible is about congruency, and then incongruent to return to congruent. Think of Old Testament. The Lord made the world, named it good. Adam and Eve named them good. Incongruence, the enemy entered. Lord returned with a plan. Old Testament Israelites, surely you brought us here to die. How many times did they say that? And yet he keeps following. And so there's congruence and incongruence. And so when we do life well, things are positive or predictable. That's as humans, our human condition. We like positive and predictable, but we know life is anything but that. So what happens when it's negative or predictable? Those are stresses, those are strains, those are taxes, those are our finances, those are things we have to face. Our stress and our struggle. The ones that are the most hurtful are the negative, unpredictable. I didn't see that coming. I never knew that they would choose to do that. That betrayal or that loss or that tragedy, that accident. I didn't know. And we start to look upwards and say, can I trust you? Are you just negatively predictable? Is this what I can assume? Or do I still see goodness even if? So negative, unpredictable is where crisis or drama or trauma come. And it's how we navigate these dilemmas. It's how we address these. And when we meet each other in a community, we have to understand we're all living a story and we're at different parts of it. Another phrase I like, if you ever met someone and you're interacting with them, or maybe in your own life, and they do something, say something, you're like, why would they do that? It's never logical. It's emotional. What's hysterical is almost always historical. So if someone reacts in a way you don't understand, really reflect on the heart or the holy that's happening, because it's probably a story of their heart coming out. The story of their past is something emotional or relational, not just practical or logical. And our brains like to be practical and logical. So take a moment. I'm going to ask 3 questions, and I would really encourage you to reflect on these at some point this week, to have an examination of the conscious, but to really reflect and bring it to adoration even. Listen to what comes to you when I initially say these and expand on those, share those. But to take inventory. How are you? And it should be more than 3 to 5 words. Okay. I'll talk about emotions later, and they're not 4-letter swear words in therapy. Are 4-letter swear words? Good, fine, sure, okay, yep. Those are 3 to 4-letter swear words. So how are you? Where are you in your story? Where are you in your story? And then who are you becoming? Who are you becoming? Is this a story of struggle and strife, or is this a story of hope and faith and love? Another song I like is, if I told you my story. If I told you my story, there would be, and there would be. How are you? Where are you in your story? Who are you becoming? You can do a lot of therapy on your own just with that in the Lord, but those 3 questions really become a big metabolizer of assessment and where is God leading you? So why? Why is that relevant? Just as God designed us neurochemically, he designs our relationships in a certain way. There's a word called attachment. So just as my ligaments are attached to my body, they don't do very well if they're not attached. They can be securely attached, or they can be loosely attached, or very painfully attached. One of them is. I played old man ball in the last day of the last game. I found a new way to hurt myself. I go to the PT. He said, well, there's 4 ways to separate the shoulder, and based on your history, you've now found 2 or 3 of them. Okay, and it's still there. So attachment. Attachment is to the degree you feel connected or secure or known or safe with yourself, with God, with those around you. As children, we all grow up needing people. Notice how none of us would get through this world alive if we didn't have someone at some point that loved us enough to care, that cared enough to love. Right? We wouldn't. As self-determined we are, as stubborn as we are, as we would never be able to do it without relationship, without community. And that's a continued thing. We just don't always acknowledge it as we get older. So attachment is a sense of security in relationship, but also it's a sense of valuing and honoring outside of you. Who are others in your life? Are they worth it? So we can either be securely attached, or we can do what we call, and the Bible is all about returning to secure attachments, to return to goodness and again. Sometimes as humans, we tend to stiff arm people. We say, I've tried this whole thing and it doesn't seem to work. Or every time I get close, people seem to disappoint me. I'm just going to show some of me, not all. And most of us only show about 85%. There's that extra 15 that's not quite known very often or if ever. So we sort of avoid at times or permanently. Others, we think, I don't know if I'm okay with me, but as long as I do this, as long as I have that, as long as these people think this, as long as I show this, and that can even be in a church setting. That's called an anxious attachment. We're always looking outside of us to be okay. So as much as our children want reminders, sometimes we have to help them. What do you know to be true? Who are you in this? You've heard me say this 10 times, so before I answer, what do you think I'd say? It's helping them find themselves versus always depending outside. And then others have been wounded in a way that the people that are meant to help us, love us, be safe for us were also the ones who hurt us. And if we're younger or if we're in a spot where we can't do it on our own or we don't have the strength, the resource of community, we end up feeling stuck. Darned if I do, darned if I don't. I can't just confront this person because then I would be without, but if I don't, I'm harboring. So that's called a wounded attachment. And we tend to push and pull, get close, don't get too close, love me, I don't know if I want you to. And we do that, and that's more of the emotional hurts. So that's sort of the framework in which we can relate to people. And that's a starting point. But when I say, hey, how are you doing? Good, I'm fine, good, you too. There's a whole bunch of story going on all of us. And we want to work towards security. So why I have a picture of a bench. Imagine a child sitting on a bench with a parent, or you sitting on a bench with God. Beautiful park bench, beautiful park. That bench, that sense of security, we call that a secure base. So whatever you know about yourself and your relationship, how secure the bench is how you typically start from. And what we do as children, or what we do in life with scripture, is we naturally go out to explore. We're out, we have to live our life, we have to go out. And as children were to get farther and farther away from the bench, do you ever notice when, like at a wedding perhaps, you see different parents with their kids, how far do the parents let the kid go before they say, come here? Or how far does the kid get before he looks back? Or does he even try to look back and just takes off and runs? Right? So we do that. We explore, but we also proximity seek. You still there? You still love me? God, are you listening? We proximity seek. And when we turn back, what do we see? Some of us, we can't find the bench anymore. They moved it. What I thought was real, that person changed. Or some of us, it's broken. It's different. Or for others, we reject it and look for another bench. Like Jesus talking to the woman at the well, if you keep returning to this water, you're going to be thirsty. So we have to decide when we turn, what do we see? Do we feel like we can return to something? And that is so important because in life, our children in particular, when they get an owie, when they get scared, they look for us to feel safe again, to return. And if we're not used to something that's worth returning to, we tend to just be self-sufficient or we go with that. So community and church in particular, when we can be authentic as a family, a church family, we can have a safe haven, a sincere place. It's not meant to be a brand new shiny car lot. It's meant to be a used and a auto repair shop where we can come to the Lord with our brokenness, not just our shiny goodness. To sincerely grow, Christ-centered change begins with compassion. It begins with compassion to ourselves and to our story, to our bench, so to speak. Compassion to others and their story, and to God and his story for us. Not the one we thought he was writing for us, but the one he actually is calling us into. And it's ironic, but the way to really grow is actually to be weakened. We have to lament. We have to have sadness, to grieve, like the book of Nehemiah, grieving the city, recognizing the brokenness, but then returning and lamenting, but with a sadness and a conviction to return. And this is why in an hour I can't go through all of these, but forgiveness and reconciliation, to return and receive the return. The prodigal son's father welcomes him with open arms, and this prodigal son, only after surrendering and recognizing the bench he was working with was broken, does he return. But it's the brother who's indignant. It's a brother who's indifferent. He's not very receptive. So to be able to realize what kind of barriers to reconcile and restore, because that's when we can become renewed in a healthy, Christ-like community. Only if we have a place in which we see value in returning, but we can't do that if we're not honest with who we actually are, not the one we think we need to show or be. So 3 words that I use is going inward, upward, and then outward. I was driving around your parking lot for a second and I realized I've never gone the actual way I was supposed to. So I came the other way. The 2 times we came with my family, and I realized how many wrong way signs there are if you don't go right. I did ask for forgiveness because I did a quick, short little loop. I know you all were in church, so I figured an opportunity. No one, I did, but I realized how many different wrong way signs. And so if you don't go inward and upward, then outward, you end up going outward first in your life. You just try to fix it by doing this, or you try to be but if you don't take inventory of who you are or ground it with God first, we have really not a lot to offer. We're just working on an empty tank with no gas station coming. You ever driven like the Dakotas when they say 70 miles until the night? They mean that, right? I wish there was a wrong way sign in church. I wish there was an empty tank sign. We could just be aware we need to fill our tank more often than we think. So going inward, I just want to do a couple of skills. Sorry, another one of those pretty pictures my wife put on here and I forgot to use it. So going inward is, we call this self-talk, but as we think, therefore we are. So I'm going to talk about our thoughts for a second, then our feelings. But as we think, therefore we are. We know to take captive every thought, pray ceaselessly. How do you pray ceaselessly, by the way? Right? There has to be an inner room, an inner connection while we're still human beings. But pray ceaselessly and be harmony. What gets in the way? What are the famous words you probably hear from your kids when they're not agreeing with you? When you give them an instruction or maybe a relationship and you ask them to do something and they usually say, no, that's one word. 2 words I'm looking for. Yeah, but. Yeah, but. All good arguments start with yeah, but in therapy. All good arguments start with yeah, but. Yeah, but they, but yeah. So a lot of times in our own minds, we have what we call automatic negative thoughts. We have these yeah, buts, these what ifs, or but this could happen, or they shouldn't, or if only. We have these, and recognizing those and taking those captive to not assume the worst, not to be self-critical. Because what can happen is we start to, one, feel stress. Remember stress, cortisol, and then we just try to fix it. We usually lose sight of the ability to be still and know that he's there. But then also we get this despair. And despair is a sneaky thing and an overwhelming thing at the same time. Despair can be this progressive feeling of helpless or hopeless, pointless, powerless. One of my sons asked, why do I make my bed every day if I'm just going to sleep in it tonight anyway? What's the point, he's saying. We're in that tween years. What's the point? It's that pointless. But to be able to take those thoughts and realign them, what ifs, you turn those into even ifs. So just think of how many times somebody might ask, what if this, what if that? Even if that happened, what would still be true? Even if that happened, I'd love you. I'd be here for you. I love you more than this conversation, or I love you more than this issue we're facing. I love you more than the pain you just caused me. You can lead with that. That anchors, that gives them a solid bench to sit on. Does that make sense? But we have to take those thoughts captive and return them. So what if to even if? Here's a favorite of mine. Let me ask you. A lot of times people say, I can't do that. Well, I can't. Yeah, but let me ask you, can anyone here walk on water? Has anyone walked on water? Jesus, and then Peter for like a few minutes until he realized he wasn't, right? Call me out, Lord, and I'll do this. And then, whoa, shoot, I'm human again. Okay? What if the ice is frozen? Can you walk on water? Yeah, you can. Let me ask you again, see how quick you are. Can anyone breathe underwater? Well, how? Yeah, if you have scuba diving. But I bet if I led with that question, you would have said no. I can't yet, unless, or supposed to say until. When you hear yourself or someone else say, I can't, not unless what? It might be not unless God shows up. Not until. I might never forgive until I'm willing to trust the Lord has space for my pain and I'm ready to give love more than the pain. Not unless or not until. If you have those mentalities, we can get on the other side of that mountain. Even though, nevertheless. So even though I face, nevertheless, just think of that, nevertheless. It's always more true. My children, when they're real little, there's 3 of them, so we would do a teeter-totter. they'd get on and they're all excited, and I'd sit down and poof, they'd all go up. And I was heavier than all three of them, and I'm not very heavy or big. It didn't take long now. I wouldn't do this anymore because now if they all sat down, I would not get up. But no matter what they did, they couldn't get me down. They could not change my weight. They could kick and scream. I didn't leave them on too long. My wife was watching. But no matter what they did, even though, nevertheless, and that's what happens in our brain and our struggles, even though this is true, nevertheless, what's more true? Nevertheless, this is more true. These are simple words that really help us shift out of it. And then remember, I said, yeah, but you probably already said a yeah, but or two in your mind. Yeah, but yeah, I get it. And yet it's really, yep, absolutely. Not unless or not until. So being able to take captive those thoughts and challenge, there's a lot of skills that are valuable. I want to talk about feelings. I already said 4-letter swear words in therapy. Good, fine, sure. How are you feeling? Good, fine, sure. Biggest 4-letter word is love. But what feelings are and what they're not. A lot of times people say, I feel like you. That's not a feeling. You're telling me your thoughts, your conclusions, your assessment. I feel like it's never going to be nice out again. Well, my brain knows the weather usually turns. Feels like we trick ourselves thinking we're talking about feelings. We're not. When I feel like that, how do I feel? I feel sad. I feel hurt. And if I didn't feel that, what else could I feel? I have clients that worry a lot, and I say, let's just pause. I just listened for 30 minutes about all your worries, and I actually tell them, what else? I have them empty out all their worries. It's amazing. Sometimes that's 4 sessions worth. It's just empty. I'm like, wow, you have a lot of stuff in there. Look at how busy you're. And then if we could just pause that and put it at the altar and trust it's there, what else would you feel? If you didn't feel worried, what might you feel? Kind of curious how it might play out. Kind of creative of what I could do instead. Sometimes we have to neutralize our feelings so we can get to the other feelings. There's layers of feelings. Now, a quick layer of feeling is anger. When someone's angry or scared, but angry, they're almost always, in fact, the research says when kids bully, the child who's bullying in that moment at some point is also experiencing fear. It's a response to fear or insecurity. Because in that fear and insecurity, they don't like that vulnerability, so they want to feel in control again, or they want to feel like they have power, or they want to inflict the pain that they're hurting from. It's the other one, fear or hurt. And they're projecting it onto a different person in a way that gives them the counterbalance. So underneath feelings such as anger is always usually hurt or sadness or alone. If you scooped up a chunk of grass, don't do it now, it's pretty hard. Well, it's not too frozen today, but if you scooped up a chunk of grass, what you would do is you'd see the leaves or the grass, you'd see the dirt, you'd see some clumps of clay or rock, and then you'd see the roots. What were the roots attached to? The life source. So whenever you address key feelings, there is always at the root of people is goodness. I can tell you I've met thousands of people. I've never met someone who doesn't intend goodness, even if they're maniacal or scary or all sorts of, they at one point desired goodness, and that's why they're hurting the way they are. That's why they're wrapped in the way they are. So the layers of feeling is always about, usually designed as goodness, and it leads back to God. All feelings, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, all roads lead to the Capitol there. It's pretty easy. Eventually you'll find the Capitol, and then you got to go in circles until you figure out how to get off. Okay. Feelings are the same way. All roads lead back to God. If you're hurt, if you're sad, all roads lead back to God. So being able to recognize what are you feeling, because it reveals what you're thirsty for. It reveals your need. If I'm scared, what am I needing? I hear a loud noise. I might think cool, or uh-oh, or that's a bummer for whoever owns this. But I also might be scared. What am I needing? To feel comforted, or to feel safe, or to feel protective of the. We all have different needs, but those needs are legitimate and designed. So feelings reveal needs. Learning to be authentic and vulnerable and candid. I want to read something. One thing I want you to learn to do is sit in it. Oops. So here's a prayer I'm going to read. This is an invitation, and you'll hear how the feelings and the needs kind of pie together. The welcome prayer. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome all things that come to me today, because I know it's for my healing. I welcome all thoughts and feelings, emotions,
persons, situations, conditions. I let go of my desire for power and control. I let go of my desire for affection or esteem or approval or pleasure. I let go of my desire for survival and security. I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. Instead, I open to the love and presence of God and God's action within. Amen. Like a river, the underlying current is what pulls us. Those needs, those humanness is real for us. But to learn to acknowledge them and to accept them, but to surrender them, to put them above our agenda, to put them above our situation, to allow, and that's what I meant by going inward, to take honest inventory, thoughts, feelings, needs, but now to go upward, to bring it to the Lord. If we don't, everything is so fast paced, as we said. One of the sad things when I do research and presentations on technology, if we don't take that time to take inventory, we just get lost in the busyness. And there's a human condition. We're supposed to be human beings. Did you know that? That's what our name is supposed to be. Almost always, I only see a human doing. How many human doings do you know? Are you one of them? So if we don't be still and know that he's there, if we don't find time for silence and stillness and healthy solitude with the Lord, what we do is we just get distracted and busy and we're surviving. And one of the sad parts about our fast pace, our overscheduled, our brain is on constant activation. Research says we lose the ability, this is secular research, we lose the ability for 4 things: to contemplate. This is secular research. How powerful is spiritual contemplation in our soul? It's everything. To sit in the word that we hear, not just, oh, that's nice, move on, which is what our brain's designed, but our heart and soul need more. To contemplate, to connect. This is what secular research says. When we get too busy, we lose the ability to connect or empathize. And therefore, we can't be compassionate. We're just surviving. We get hardened. And then the last is to self-regulate, to be able to calm and to have a threshold that's more than just a nanosecond of when I'm bored or when to be able to sit in silence and stillness and solitude, to embrace those holy moments. I don't know if your church does, but Matthew Kelly, Holy Moments, Rediscovering Jesus, it's a book, but Holy Moments, a wonderful book. Took 3 sittings to read, not much, but just he defines very nicely. And then it's almost like love languages, but just recognizing how many little moments we can do to allow those for ourselves and then for others, or from others, ourselves, and then to others, to really bring life into our hearts. But I would encourage you to find the cherishing moments. Give her a cherishing, to catch a smile and to sit with it for a second, to see the joy and to share that for a moment, instead of just always moving to the next thing. And then lingering, to linger. A lot of times as a male therapist, I work with men, I'm sorry, but we're just not as emotionally attuned. We're not wired that way. Seven more wirings. Women have 7 more wirings to their emotional, relational brain than we do. We're just, if you ever look for a blue ketchup bottle, I always look for a blue ketchup bottle, you never find it. My wife's shocked. Every time I look for something, she's like, how did you not see it? It's right in front of you. It's because I had some picture in my mind that wasn't what I was actually looking for, and I could never find it. So we just get focused on things. And women are more connected to different emotion. So if I ask a guy sometimes, do you feel your feelings? First off, they usually ask what are feelings. But then, do you feel your feelings? And I said, okay, let me try this. Does a duck get wet? Does it? It's got oil on its feathers, but it's in the water. We could both be right. Does a duck feel wet? Do you feel your feelings? We know when we recognize them, do we actually sit in and feel them? So to be able to cherish, to feel, to linger in those. Do you taste your food? Or do you just chew and swallow? Do you actually taste it? You're supposed to chew for 25 times, I think, before you swallow. Do you taste your food? So to linger, I'd encourage you to find ways to just pause and to linger. we all have likely prayer practices. I thoroughly enjoy the Catholic approach to disciplines, the scripture, the rosary. So being intentional about those. But to find as adults, we do this for others. We don't do this for ourselves. We don't give ourselves permission. We don't receive invitations very well. And we certainly aren't very good at prompting ourselves. To kids, we're, hey, time to go to bed, time for this. But to be prompted when the Lord says, this is the time I need for you, or invited, here's a chance to show compassion, not reaction. So when we slow down, we can see things more thoroughly. But we have to find stillness, settledness, and centered. So let's practice a breathing exercise. Best way to do that, best way to get to your brain is actually through your airways. So I like, some people sat up straighter. So we're going to practice for a second some breathing. Okay? So just breathe normal for a second. Now I'm going to teach you box breathing if you're familiar with it, but it's just 4 breaths or 4 seconds in. Hold it for 4 seconds. 4 seconds out. Hold it for 4 seconds. Do it one more time. Just box breathing. I'll give you another one called ventriloquism breathing. My daughter took up a passion of ventriloquism. It lasted like, a $30 subscription in about 2 weeks, and then she was done with it. But the beginning of ventriloquism, because she was done with it, because everything was about breathing. So ventriloquism breathing is breathing in as long as you can. Go farther than you realize, holding it, and then breathing out as long as you can. And let's do it one more time. Don't hyperventilate. Long as you can. Now, half a second breath more, and then out as long as you can. Just pay attention. 0 to 10. How deep are you breathing right now? 0 to 10. 10 meaning the most. You're probably like 4s, 5s, 6s. I bet in a given day or life, you're like 3s and 4s, or sometimes 2 or 1, 0. And when you're stressed, or when some kind of conflict, you barely breathe at all. The instinct is, it's pressure chest, throat, push out air. Right? That's what it sounds like. Taking 5 seconds, taking 5 minutes, turning off the whatever in the car, just being still, and then catching that. Before you walk into a room, envision a word or two. It could be from the Beatitudes, it could be from anything. Be still, or patience, or compassion. Walk into the room with that in your mind as you took a 5-second breath, and you'll just shift your brain into a different emotional state. And if you can do that more often, you're actually creating a new pathway, just like GPS usually. I love GPS, Google. Every time I play tricks, I try to play tricks on it. I'm like, well, what if I'm here and I want to go there? What if it always keeps finding me back home. Sometimes as I'm driving, it's like recalculating. That's what happens when I ask guys, how are they feeling? They're like, recalculating. What am I feeling? So they're recalculating. But being able to recalibrate, what is it that I want to do? And am I able to do it even when, even if? If you can hold firm, you actually find balance and you override your circuitry again. So taking breath more often to ground ourselves is so important. I want you to breathe in this prayer. You've heard it before, the Serenity Prayer. But you might not have heard the second paragraph. And I'll have you Google search it sometime if you like. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to read it to you, and then it's up here. No, I'll just give it to you. It's in the middle. It's on the left. I'll just rehearse it because I believe in it myself. But just breathing for a moment as we do. So, Lord, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. The peace, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It's the one we know. We usually don't know this next one. Learning to live one day at a time. Enjoy each moment at a time. Accepting hardships as a pathway to peace. Taking this sinful world as Jesus did, the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. And trusting that if I surrender to his will, I may be reasonably happy in this world, forever happy with him in the next. Amen. Who signs up to be reasonably happy? It's a pretty good outcome, really. But we don't actually think we want to be reasonably happy or to take this world as it is. I'll literally pray that when my kids are, here we are. I'm going to take this as it is. Whew, here we go. They'll hear me say that. Here we go. Dad, where are we going? I'm like, no, here we go. All right. Okay, Lord. Right? So to breathe in and take time. This one's longer, but I do encourage you to research or find it. I can forward these to you as well through Grace or through the presenters. But the litany of trust, I won't read it all, but each one is a power punch to your stomach. Each one's a hit to your soul. Lord, deliver me from. Lord, I pray to, and it's going to hit these emotional needs. It's a very private, personal. You can go through this and just circle the ones that really stick to you that day and reflect on it. Or if you find yourself always circling the same 5 or 6, you probably want to pay attention to that. But it's to seek God to help deliver us, but also at the end to trust. From the fear I'm unlovable, from the false security that I have, from the fear of trusting you will leave me more destitute. Do you ever have that? It's like an inner temper tantrum. Or if I trust you in this, if I really let go of this, what am I going to face or feel instead? I'll compromise. I'll kind of go in the middle. And then I wonder why it's never quite fulfilling. So to go inward and upward allows us to go towards each other, to go towards God. The antidotes to depression, yes, sometimes medication helps us get a better baseline. And depression is different than despair. Despair is that fear, helpless, hopeless. But depression oftentimes is a disconnect emotionally, and we're not bringing those natural nutrients. Some of the antidotes to depression, see if you can hear the common ingredient, but empathy, gratitude, and altruism, or charity. What do you need for all 3 of those? Another person. To be empathetic, to be caring and compassionate to someone else outside of you. To have gratitude and thankfulness of something to God or something from others, and to have altruism or charity, a desire to do well with what we've been given. There's a concept of power of the other, Henry Cloud, and he talks about how connection, the types of connection, and we oftentimes live in this land of no connection. It's like a cell phone when you get off of airplane. At first, you can't hear, oh, it's not working. And if your cell phone never worked, by the way, all it is just it's a magic plastic box. It doesn't do much without the internet. But to not connect, to not feel connected, that's a scary thing, but sometimes we just resign to that. So there's no connection. Or else we get ensnared in this bad connection. It's what we know, but it's not always great for us. It's who we tend to do. It's the dance that we've gotten used to. It's what we've learned or taught each other. Or we get into these false good connections. We overseek things. We overforce, and we make idols out of something we're not meant to. But we're called to true connection. And true connection, as we know, is going to be out of fellowship with ourselves and God. Intimacy. Conflict leads to intimacy. I work with different addictions and integrity-based addictions, and I've never met someone who doesn't make sense. What they're thirsty for is always a deeper connection and intimacy. They're just finding it in illegitimate ways. Anything you struggle with is probably a legitimate need trying to be met or interacted or negotiated happiness with someone in an illegitimate or unhelpful way. So recognizing the need and the compassion to others allows us then to connect to others as we connect to ourselves. Getting involved in groups, or that's why I love this fellowship, getting involved in support, teaching and learning, as you know. What happens when you show up to someone is you overcome a huge fear or core belief. If someone knew me, they would run. If someone saw me, they wouldn't love me. But what happens when they stay? One of the best things I can do, this isn't therapy, but also my marriage, my wife says is, just be quiet. I just listen. Did you know the letters listen and silent are spelled with the same letters? Just listen. Because I just see you then. I just hear you. To give safe spaces and safe people and sacred places in our hearts. To be courageous enough to be known, but also to allow yourself to know each other. And there's barriers. So I was told 12:15. I'm going to finish in about 2 minutes with the video. But barriers. I want to do a quick little demonstration. It's supposed to be easy, right? If you Google, some of the 2 most anxiety-inducing interactions as humans. Just think how hard it is to share your feelings and thoughts. But let's start easier. The hardest things is people interacting, one of the two most anxiety inducing, is eye contact and hugs. Google search hugs. Are hugs good for people? Are hugs psychologically healthy? Absolutely, if there was safe people in a safe place. So what happens, what's the average hug, would you say? Your church community seemed pretty connected, so you probably would see longer hugs. But let's say you go to a random wedding. How long are hugs usually? What would you say, average? 2 to 3 seconds. How do you know when a hug's done? Just watch people once. How do you know when a hug's done? Yeah. Somebody pushes or taps out. They kind of just like tap out. Like, oh, I'm going to see you. We're good. What's happening in that moment? The millisecond before the hug, when the hug's happening, it feels good. It feels nice. It feels appropriate. It feels obedient. You're supposed to do that. There's some sort of goodness. But then all of a sudden, there's a half second or so, your brain's like, oh, this is weird. Or, oh, are they okay? Oh, people are watching. There's some sort of disconnect, and your brain actually shoots that norepinephrine. Remember endorphin and dopamine? It shoots that norepinephrine, and it's actually trying to help you survive by tapping out. Whew, I just saved you. You're good. Right? I've got a minivan that I drive straight, and every once in a while, when the person's taking a left, if I don't put my right blinker on, which can be dangerous because now it looks like it thinks I'm going to crash, so it like goes real loud, and it just shuts the whole thing down. It scares my kids. It's trying to save me. So is your brain trying to save you when you tap out of a hug. But if you hold in it that half second longer, if you just say, it's okay, we're good. I don't care what they think. This is good. This is nice. That 3-second hug turns into a 30-second hug. If you can fight that for 30 seconds, you're going to feel a lot of turbulence because your brain's not used to it. Also, this can be a 30-minute hug. I do this in couples therapy, and my sessions are only 55 minutes, so I can't do it too often. But they'll hug forever. Man, this feels good. And they warm, and they connect they thaw out to parts of their heart that they otherwise weren't letting people in. Same thing with eye contact. Eye contact, such a sacred space. Now, don't do this at the grocery store, okay? It's not nice. But about the same thing. If I looked at you longer than 5 seconds, you start to feel things either weird about me or start to feel things about you that might feel weird. But to be seen and to be known, we all cherish it, but yet we tend to look away. So I want to show you something. It's a video. I think it's going to have sound. This is a 60-second experiment, 1-minute experiment. One moment before I push the button. 1-minute experiment. They do this all across the world. A couple different times now they've done this. It's called the human eye contact experiment. And they just take people throughout the world and in a town square, and all they do is they have chairs set up and people are to sit, total strangers, and look at each other for 1 minute, no talking. And what you'll probably notice or think is at first it's uncomfortable. And then there's that range of looking away and kind of smiling and awkward smile. And then they sit in it and just watch what happens. 1 minute, they never met each other. Let me know what you think. Thank you. 1 minute to be seen, to be even known. Different stories, different journeys, different benches, so to speak. But to be heard even without words, to be felt even if there is an embrace. And that's how God, we're wired that way. Yet it's the busyness that gets in our way, but to hear that from God, that he knows us by name, he knows every word, hair on our head. He hears our cries, our desires, our needs. He hasn't forsaken us. He wants us to be still and be near and be beside him, to abide in him. He so loves the world, he sent his only son to send us out on that mission of love, but he'll be with us always. And that's my prayer. It's my hope. That's why I love community, but it starts inward and upward and outward. And most of you have children, so to be able to just give them a blessing by sitting with them for a minute, watching them, just connecting with them. I love you more than this issue we're going through. And life is about 4 words. Hallmark or Kirkland's had this pretty well, except for the last one. But live. Just to live, to experience life, but to learn from it. What are we learning? What are we experiencing? Or else we're just surviving it. We just go through life. A quick story. If we don't, that call to adventure, that call to action, but to grow from learning, do we allow love in? We can't allow love in if we don't breathe in. And if you ever breathe in deep like we just did, sometimes I cough when I do that because my lungs aren't used to breathing in deep enough to let God in to that place that I otherwise want to push away or feel like I need this before I get this. So to let love, and then from that we grow. We grow in the here and now, not the then and there. A lot of times we live our life then and there, past or future, just as soon as someday, oh, if only, I wish. Here and now, we have that opportunity. So I'll leave you with 3 songs you can tell your kids can teach you if you don't remember. This is therapy in 3 songs. Ready? He's got the whole world in his hands. Jesus loves me, this I know. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. If you sing those songs, you share those with your kids, if they share those with you, that is therapy. It's returning back and yet reaching out. Thank you for having me. I nailed it right 5 minutes before your kids. So you said the floodgates in case I knew the emotions floodgates might come. I thought I'd give you 5 minutes to debrief before you go out and be parents and grandparents and everything else. But thank you for having me. God bless.